Okay. Right, so we just saw now. My name's Michelle, and this is the first session of 3 groups that I'm going to be looking at creation and environmental ethics. So thank you for joining me. This is a subject that I'm really passionate about, really keen to share some stuff that I've been learning at college, where I'm a minister in training, and just stuff that I've always been interested in life in general. So we're going to look at some things of the Christian view of creation, and then match that up with things that are going on in the world out there, discussions that are taking place in the world out there, and how we can really live caring for the world. So in this first session is going to be look at how Christians view creation. Then our second session next week will be about how do we view the world, you know, whether we have a faith or not, how do we view it? And in the last session, we'll be looking at some sort of practical ways of caring for the world. So I'm just going to share a PowerPoint now. Just bear with me a moment. I have done this before, but I've just got to remind myself how to do it. Files.
Technology and computers.
Yes, I know. Oh dear. Sorry, bear with me a minute.
Not a problem.
No, not at all.
Okay,
good,
can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Brilliant. Right. Okay. So this is just the thing saying about the sessions. So we're starting off, what do Christians understand by creation? Then how do we view the world? And then creation in practice. So this is our first session. What do Christians understand by creation? So we're going to start by looking at, I think, the passage that everyone really thinks of. First of all, about creation, the start of the Bible, so the start of the Old Testament, where it talks about God making the world. So I'm just going to read that through, and then we're going to have a look at it afterwards. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruits with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky, to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons, and days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky, to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God said that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living and moving thing with which the water teems, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw that all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So I don't take this passage literally. I know there's some difference of opinion about that, mainly with Christians. So I take it to be poetry rather than a literal description. So it has some things in common with other ancient texts. So there were other ancient texts written down that describes the beginning of the world. Some people think that this was written when the Israelite people were in exile in Babylon later on. But I don't take it as literally word for word true in that sense. But I do think it shows us lots that's true about God's work, and so it's a theological truth, I would say. So I think that it has some implications for how we view creation and how we view the world from what is said in this passage. So the world was created by a mindful designer. It was not a random event. So, I mean, not everybody thinks that is the case, but this is what this text is saying, that the world came about because of God's decision. Everything that exists has its origin in God. That's another thing that this passage tells us. God created the world from nothing. So in the early centuries of the church, people debated how the world had been created. And looking at this text and other discussions, it was decided that there was nothing and then God created the world. This text shows that nature itself is not divine, but its creator is. It's saying that God brings order. It's saying that everything was created good. Evil is a departure from this. So good is how it is, and evil is the departure. God is distinct from the world, but his presence is ongoing. Creation implies God's authority over the world. God makes human beings in his image and he speaks to them directly. He's actually speaking to the humans in this passage. He gives stewardship of the earth to human beings, although they were not created first, you might notice. Male and female humanity is created deliberately and necessarily. God takes joy in his creation. So it's a work of love that he performs here. And Sabbath is a fundamental principle. So written right into this is the importance of rest, the world resting, God resting. So for Christians, as opposed to people of other faiths or none, creation is about God speaking the world into existence. So we see so many times in that passage, God said, God said, God said. And it's about the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Spirit. We read that the Spirit of God was hovering. So the Father, Son, and Spirit were there right from the beginning, is what this text tells us. In the opening of the Gospel of John, when we get to the New Testament, the author speaks about Jesus, who's called the Word, being there at creation, and again when he was born into the world as a baby in the incarnation. So in the Gospel of John it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God in the beginning." A little bit later, "The Word became flesh and had his dwelling amongst us." So the beginning of John is another text that speaks about the beginning, speaks about creation, but brings Jesus into that conversation. So then just one more idea I'd like to introduce is something that was quite a new idea to me until studying and reading a bit more. Is this idea of recreation to do with God's redemption of the fallen world. So we see in Genesis God creating the world. We see again at the beginning of the book of John how Jesus is there at the beginning of the creation of the world. But then if we look at other parts of the Bible, when we talk about what God is going to do in the future, we see something else. So in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, which is read a lot at Christmas, of course, we hear lots about what God intends to do in the future, how he intends to make things better in the future. So I'm just going to read a little bit from Isaiah 65. So this section is called New Heavens and a New Earth. "Behold, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight, and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more. Never again will there be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. He who dies at 100 will be thought a mere youth. He who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will enjoy the works of their hands. They will not toil in vain or bear children doomed to misfortune, for they will be a people blessed by the Lord. They and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. and the lion will eat straw like the ox, and dust will be the serpent's food. But dust will be the serpent's food. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. So we've got some link back to the creation story there. And then we've got this amazing picture at the end of there being no predators within nature, you know, of people and animals being at peace with one another. And then the last Bible passage I want to look at is Revelation 21. So the book of Revelation, awful lot going on there, very confusing. I can't claim to fully understand it, but it does talk about how God is going to put everything right at the end of time. And then again, it talks about a new Jerusalem and a new heaven and a new earth. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To him who is thirsty, I will give to drink without cost from the spring of the water of life. So many theologians have written and talked about how these passages are a vision of God's future redemption, when God will restore the goodness of the original creation. So the way I see it is like a circle where you've got the world created in this wonderful, beautiful way at the beginning, and then God is going to bring that back round again. So rather than the idea of the world being thrown away at the end of time, this is the idea that heaven will come down to earth, that the new Jerusalem will come down to earth, and then everything will be redeemed, the whole of nature, as well as the whole of humanity. Okay, so I'll just stop sharing that screen now. Okay, so any thoughts on that? I haven't got specific questions. I'm just happy for you to share any thoughts or comments or questions.
Yes, I think that's very good thing not to take the creation story literally, because I don't think that's the way it was meant to be taken. But it was sufficient for the people it was written for, who were not backward, but not, they haven't got the sort of education that people of the 20th and 21st century have got.
So it's not a scientific document, is it? It's not. Yes, it's not answering scientific questions.
That's right. Because there's a lot of people who treat the Bible like a scientific textbook, and you just got to say no. That's not what it's supposed to be.
And yeah, it's not necessarily at odds with science either. It's just not.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
It's just not. It's not doing the same job as science. It's doing a different job.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Robin, you're muted.
I wonder whether the idea of recreation leads people to believe that they can treat the world as they wish and it will always be fixed.
We will come back to that. That's definitely something we will come back to. So we'll say a little bit more about that today, probably, and definitely more next week. Although you could argue it the other way and say that that if the world is going to be thrown in the bin, then that's more of a reason then for people not to care for it than if they think it's going to be remade. But both could be argued, I suppose.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with both those points actually, but I particularly agree with Gary's comments. Yeah, that the Bible's not to be taken as a science textbook, but when you kind of dissected it, the creation, it doesn't disagree with what science is saying about creation, especially the Big Bang. If you look at the Big Bang theory, which is, the universe was created or appeared out of nothing, but for reasons that have no explanation if you take it purely from a scientific point of view.
Yes, I was going to say that actually, because I know that some people have said that sudden sort of explosion can be read into Genesis, really, or not read into it as in it just put there. I mean, it can be understood in that way as well.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not at odds with it.
Yeah, so did you, I mean, I can put those things back up if you want to, but did you agree with, the things that I'd taken from Genesis? I mean, that was a mixture of stuff that I thought and stuff that I'd read about. Do you think that is what Genesis is showing us? Because obviously not everyone will necessarily agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I pretty much agree with it entirely, Michelle, yes.
Yes, I'd agree with Robin as well, yes.
Hello, Liz. Are you there, Liz? Hello.
Sorry, I couldn't get on. I've been trying.
Oh, bless you.
Oh.
It's okay.
Oh, this is Liz from our church. I could tell from Bellevue. I could tell by her voice, but obviously we can't. Oh, there she is. We can see her now as well.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Hi, Liz.
I have recorded it, and if it's okay with you, I'm still recording now.
Yeah.
So you can go back and listen to the bit at the beginning if you want to later on.
Okay, lovely.
I'll get that sorted out. But anyway, yes.
Yeah.
Let's carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, I don't know. I'm sorry you couldn't get on.
Yeah, no, it's just my phone must be.
Oh, it's a pain.
I like the idea that human beings are created as stewards of the earth rather than in control of the earth. I think if we still stood by that ideal, the way the world was treated in general would be a very, very different place. And the way that we treated the creations that have been put on earth would be incredibly different as well. I think we'd be a lot more respectful of what was given to us.
And I think the problem is there's been largely a misunderstanding, both in secular thinking and in Christian thinking, that it's ours to do what we like with, not ours to care for. And that leads to, that's more we're going to look at next time, but that leads to exploitation, doesn't it? When you think that you can you're in charge and you can do whatever you like. And I think that has been a big problem, definitely.
Yeah.
We just looked, Liz, at the first part of Genesis.
Okay, yeah.
And what that shows us about, and one thing that came out of that was about stewardship, as we were just saying. Yeah. And then we moved on to look a little bit at the start of the Gospel of John, which also talks about, Jesus being there at the beginning of the world.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we talked about an idea that people are talking about now. When we look at redemption, what we look at about God putting the world right, that can be seen as a full circle from creation at the beginning to coming round and God's making the world anew at the end.
Okay.
So rather than the world being sort of thrown away, it's going to be recreated and put back to its original beauty. Right. That's kind of the basis of what we were saying. But say I've got a bit more detail on the PowerPoint of that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, so what did you think about this idea of the recreation? Because I think that's not something that I've ever heard people talk about in churches.
No, me neither.
No, that's new to me.
Yeah.
I'd want to think it through a bit more, I think, but it did, as you said it did make sense to me, yes.
Yeah,
So, I mean, not everyone would necessarily agree with that.
No.
I've had a debate with at least one person who's still to be convinced. But there are people writing, you know, particularly Tom Wright, you know, N.G. Wright, he's sometimes called, who's done a lot of writing about, I mean, I'm reading a bit of Surprised by Hope at the moment, which is, because, and he, you know, he's really rethought some of the church's teaching. But there's other, you know, other writers have written on creation that are very much like some American theologians, are very much argued about the harm that has been done by thinking that it's okay to exploit the world. But when you actually look at the Bible, even when you look in the Old Testament about how the Israelite people are told to care for the land, you know, they're told to leave enough at the edges of fields so that poor people can come and glean. They're told things like, if you're taking a bird and eggs, don't take both, you know, take the eggs or the birds so that species can continue. So there's things, the more I look at it, the more I think there's in there that we don't necessarily notice at first. This real kind of care for the world that I think runs throughout. And I don't think it's necessarily always been spotted, really. But as I say, I mean, you don't have to, oh dear, she's gone. You don't, you know, if you disagree with that or want to look at that a bit more, then that's fine.
I think it's easier not to notice it.
Yes.
Oh yeah, people like to avoid things that are uncomfortable, don't they? Sometimes, yeah.
Absolutely. And the idea that the earth and its resources are not there for us to use as we please is quite an uncomfortable thought for a lot of people. The idea that there is something that should be sacred, that should be taken care of, rather than just used as a resource, is quite an uncomfortable thought for people.
Yes, and I think so. Then again, we'll go on to this a little bit more next week, but it's about mindsets and worldviews, isn't it? Of whatever your theory is, whatever your theology is, and you can be an atheist and still have a theology. Theology is just about your kind of understanding of what you make of creation and God and all those kind of topics, really. That brings an attitude with it that then affects what you do. Because then, you know, so that affects your practice, because if you feel that we've got a responsibility to care for the world, then you're going to have a very different attitude to if you think, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's all going to be rubbish. That's going to make you behave differently, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is. The idea of everything being redeemed is much better than the idea of everything being destroyed and then, like, you know, moving on to something completely new. I mean, that is what you're saying, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I suppose it would be like if you had a coat and you knew you weren't going to get a new one, you'd look after it, wouldn't you? Whereas if you thought you'd just get a new one next week, you wouldn't be so careful with it. So I think that's the idea coming with it. Although I can see, it's interesting what Nat says about perhaps you could still think, somebody could still think, well, it's going to be put better, so it's going to be, but then So I still don't need to care for it. You were saying you could even still have that attitude, weren't you? You were saying, which I can see that. I can see that. Yeah, so I suppose, and I think that's something that has been written about as well. You know, people thinking, well, God's going to sort this out, so it's not my responsibility to do anything about it. Whereas I would look at it more as, you know, God, by what he says in the Bible and what we see in nature, wants us to join in with that care, not to add to the destruction.
Yeah, we are responsible, aren't we?
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, we should. Everybody should be responsible. A loss of people who aren't.
Sadly, a lot of them head corporations, and a lot of the destruction is money led. Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think that is the problem. Yeah, I think that is a big part of it. Definitely. I think by having a very consumerist culture, that causes a lot of difficulty. Definitely. Yeah. So perhaps if I just, we might finish a little bit earlier than 9, but if I go back and just go through that PowerPoint again, then maybe we can look at some of the little bits of detail on it. So if I,
okay.
Oops. Oh dear.
Promising.
There we are. Yeah.
Yep.
Getting used to this now. All right. Whoops.
Yes. We're there.
Okay. Yes. So so when we were so there's this also leads to a discussion of kind of good and evil. So constantly throughout the Genesis account, it is good, it is good, it is good. And yet we don't always necessarily see that, do we? We don't walk around thinking how wonderful everything is. In fact, we can see a lot of things that are wrong. So that is quite a challenging thing to keep, I think, to keep reminding ourselves that the world is ultimately good.
I mean, just my immediate...
Well, sorry, Robin.
Go on, Gary. No, go on. You go first.
Okay.
You're so polite.
The thing is, the world was created good. It was created without a flaw. But evil has got in. And so it is a flawed creation now. And at the end, when God wraps things up and redeems everything, then the evil will be gone. It'll be back to how it should have been.
I agree, but we're in this difficult intermediate time, aren't we?
Yes.
Where we can see all these things, and even in nature, we see the cruelty of nature, don't we? We see the harshness of nature.
Well, that's it. Because they're saying that nature is red in tooth and claw. But I mean, that wasn't always the way. That wasn't the way it was created. That's the way. That is how it is in a flawed world, not in a perfect world. And things won't be perfect until the very end.
And what I think is really fascinating, you know, there's these repeated references to not only, you know, nobody going hungry and no creature going hungry, but also to these predators with their prey they're not being predators, which is just a shocking thing. We can hardly imagine that, can we? And yet this is this vision that we see particularly in Isaiah, you know, where there won't be that, you know, one animal desperately hungry and pursuing another, you know, that the world is redeemed will not be like that, which is just a mind-blowing thing. But that you know, that really does seem to be the vision.
It does say the lion will be with the lamb.
And
which is definitely not what's happened now, is it?
No.
And even in the Genesis account, it doesn't actually say about humans eating other creatures. It says about, you know, plants being provided, doesn't it? It doesn't actually seem to say. I know this is going to be highly contested, but
no, eating meat didn't come in until after Noah's flood. That's when humans were given permission to eat meat. Before then, it was just like plant vegetarian type stuff.
It does seem to be, from what we read, it really does. And yet, of course, when we see Jesus was eating at least fish.
Yes,
but then in that time they weren't they? So it was, and it wasn't factory farming, was it?
No. If you read the Bible after the flood, when Noah had his ark, it was after the flood, and I think it was after they came out of the ark, that God then said, put meat on the menu.
Yes. And this idea of Sabbath, you know, that we think of about, you know, people think of it as being Sunday, but it doesn't have to be Sunday. It can be any day of the week. It's just about taking rest.
Yes.
It's also, you know, you can take by extension to be the earth having a rest. So where the world is pushed to its absolute limits, where, you know, the rainforest is destroyed and people are trying to produce more and more foods more and more quickly, it's not giving the land that rest. Whereas then again, we go back to the Old Testament and we see how God is telling people to care for the earth, you know, to rest it, to allow it time to recover. So the way as we need to sleep and we need to have rest, the world does too. And I think that's a principle, again, that when you go back and read some of this, you can really see that throughout the Old Testament, particularly. You can really see that.
Yeah, because we eat food out of season, don't we? Because we can get it from other places.
Yes.
Yeah. I suppose. Yeah.
We also don't leave fields fallow anymore.
No.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah, the nutrients came from the soil.
Mm.
The nutrients in food now aren't in the soil, so they're either not in there, or you have to eat a huge abundance of the food to get anywhere near the nutrients, or they're artificially put in, which obviously isn't good either.
Traditionally, if you go back a couple of 100 years, there was a cycle where you left the ground fallow for a year, grazed sheep on it, and then can't remember which you grew next, but you grew something like potatoes, and then you grew wheat, and then you grew something, maybe beans, peas, that sort of thing. And the group worked together.
They rotated, didn't they?
Rotated. That's the word I'm looking for.
Crop rotation.
Yeah, crop rotation. Yeah. Your first point there, that creation was the work of a mindful designer. struck with me, because if you look at physics and chemistry and that, there are just a very few basic forces in nature and a few elementary particles. I think it's 5 of one and 6 of the other, and yet they can be put together in a combination to make everything from a sun, as in the one in the sky, that type of sun, to a mouse or us or anything else. And that, to me, you know, if you change one of the properties of any of those, none of it works. So to me, it's a very mindful designer.
And I think that also leads you to take a different attitude, because if you think that you're in the world that's created by somebody that you want to follow, and that you know is a father, is you know God the Father, then you're but it's not at all to say that people that don't believe don't want to care for the earth. It's not that, but it gives you another reason. And I think, you know, from where I was agnostic and I cared about the world, now I care about the world even more passionately, because I've got even more reason to want to care for it, believing that God created it and reflecting on that. I think it just adds to it in my view, and the fact that he seemed to take such joy in it. It was a work of joy. It was a labour of love. You know, I think that's just beautiful. Then again, not to take it literally, but just that theologically, God takes absolute joy in the world, and yet must be so distraught at how it's being treated.
It's respect as well, isn't it? If you have a love and a respect for somebody or something, and they create something for you and everybody else, you want to take care of that. You don't take it for granted, because you respect the creator of that.
Yeah, it'd be like somebody painting a wonderful picture and then somebody just kind of tearing it up. Yeah.
It's having the respect for the creator and the created, because you respect.
Oh, you cut out. Oh, she muted herself.
No, I didn't. Sorry.
I've never known you to mute yourself before. That was interesting.
Somebody tried to ring me. Sorry.
Okay. She's just so popular. Were you going to finish that sentence? No, she wasn't. Okay, carry on, Gary, while she's doing what she's doing.
I wasn't really saying anything.
Oh, I thought you did. Sorry.
No,
okay. I must have imagined it. Okay, so any final thoughts or comments before we finish?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
That's all right.
Okay then. So I say so if people, you know, ask about this, and the recording will be available, as I say, and then next week, for anyone who can make it next week, we're looking at a little bit more, as we touched on already, about the mindsets and the world views, that our views leads to how we treat the world, and we're going to be looking a bit more of that. And there's some particular writers who I've looked at in quite a lot of detail, and so I'm going to share a little bit about some of those writers and what they've said about our view. And so if any of you can't make it, then I'll get it shared as well. Okay, so thank you ever so much for coming. It's been really, really fun. Oh, I think Liz is saying something, but I can't hear her because she's muted.
Oh dear.
Oh,
nope.
No, she's gone.
Liz having real trouble with the technology.
Oh dear, poor thing. Okay, yeah, so, oh, she's back. Were you going to say something, Liz?
No. I just was saying thank you. It's been good what I've heard. Yeah. Interesting.
Thank you, Michelle, for putting this together for us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
very interesting.
Lovely.
Thank you. Take care. See you
And
soon.
you. Yeah.
And you.
Bye.
Very, very, very,
Bye.